This person, at requesting the tip for this particular quick tip, had finished watching our quick tip 127 and then asked me this question, and I've gotten this kind of question before. Anyway, here she says, when people make that grayscale and have it handy while they're painting, can you use different variations of the grayscale and just add color to that when you're trying to change the value? Okay, that's one question. And then the other one says, this is what's confusing to me about the grayscale. I don't know if people are saying they should paint an entire painting in the grayscale and then have color over it, add color over it, or if you're supposed to use the different colors of the grayscale and add that specifically to the color you're trying to change the value of. It's time to give that grayscale some love. Well, there are two approaches to painting. One is an old traditional approach where everything on the canvas is done in the variations of the grayscale or variations of value to begin with, and then color is laid on top of that, usually after that dries. So that is more of an indirect approach, a very long, time-consuming approach. And then the more modern approach, which is really 300 or 400 years old, maybe 200 years old. Anyway, a more modern approach is what we call the direct approach. That's where the value in the color, or the value of the color, goes directly on the canvas during the painting process. So that would straighten that out. But I don't know of any process that has a gray scale and then mixes color into the value of the grayscale. So I think that it might be just a little bit misleading. Let's just look at how we use that grayscale, that value scale, and how we get the values of the colors to begin with. Very simple. For one, we call it the value scale. There are many versions of it. This is one of the versions that's really more readily available in the art supply stores. This is a version that's on our website at DianneMize.com. It's free, and so if you have a printer, you can download that as a PDF, and you can print it, and it doesn't cost you anything, and then you can punch holes right here in between these little segments of value to compare, to look through, to compare the values that you're aiming for. So that's that part. But why do we have a value scale to begin with? It's only a guide. It's just a guide to enable us to distinguish the differences in values. Now, if I use this, first of all, everything we look at has a value. We can't see it without that. And what causes that value is light. The degree of light that any portion of an image is receiving gives it a particular value. No matter what color it is, that value is determined by the amount of light. Now, you can see here, we've got the same photo, the same image, this one in color, and this one, the color is taken out. But see, you don't have any trouble reading this image. You can tell exactly what image. The only thing you don't know here is what color the horses are. You could probably guess, but you don't, the guess doesn't quite cut it. And we've got the grass, the areas of grass here, and we know it's grass, and but we don't really know what color. Is it the green grass we see here, or is it a browner grass, or a more of a yellow gold type grass that we see sometimes in the winter time? So you see, the color tells us more about it, but the color doesn't really enable us to see it. It's the light that enables us to see the images and see them in 3 dimension, see their spatial relationships and all that. All right, so then how do we know how to come up with this color? We start out by knowing the value of every color we use for our painting. Every tube color you have, know its value. For example, I know my yellow is a light color. It's a Hansa yellow light. It belongs here on my palette. And I know it's a light color. And I know that if I need to lighten the color, it is one option if I also need to change the color. Of course, white is obvious. We know that we use white to lighten. But I know the value of each color that's on my palette. And I know what happens to that value when white is added. So the first thing is become cognizant of the values of every color that comes out of your tube. Now some of them, mostly they'll fall in the light range of the dark range. For example, the transparent colors like this one, which is Rembrandt transparent oxide red, very dark in value. And so I know that, and because I know that, I know how to use it to get the values I need. So there's your first thing right there. Then how do you find the value? How do you know that value? Let me start with that. How do you know that value? You train yourself to see it. Now, one thing that you can use as a guide to help you train yourself to see it is a red transparency. Now, this is for training only. Once you get used to knowing when you look at a yellow, you recognize it like you recognize a person's face. You recognize it as a light value. Then you don't need this anymore. But, well, this little gizmo is something I inherited. I have no idea where it came from. You see, it's a red transparency. Now, I know, let's see if the camera will show me this. Let's just put the color wheel right up here. Now you see, if we hold a red transparency over the color wheel, it subtracts out the color. So you can look through the red transparency like that out into the landscape, and it will subtract out the color, and you can see more closely what the values are. And that's not perfect, but it gives you an idea of what the values are. And so this way I can identify when I look through this at the color wheel, and I know you can't see it along with me, but when I look through this at the color wheel, I can see clearly that this value is just a tad darker than this one. This one's a tad darker than that one. This one is very much darker than either of these. And so I've identified then the degree of value that each of these colors on the color wheel belongs to. So there's one place to start. Now, how do you do that? Now, this may feel just a little bit too simple or simplified for those of you who are accustomed to working with color and the values of color, but bear with me. So if we look at this right here, we don't just see green. Learn how to identify the value of the color when you look at it. We don't just see green, we see a light green. And we don't, well, of course, the color changes too, but I'm just going to talk about the value in this tip. Only the value. We see a light green. Just how light is it? So if you just call it green to yourself, and then you go looking for green, you might guess forever before you identify the value. But you can use the value scale to help you identify the value. Now this value scale comes in with these little slots in it that enables you to look through the slot and read the value. So you see, now and if you squint just a little bit, you see it's really, really easy. If I look through this slot, you see this value is a middle value. If I look through this slot, I see it's lighter than this. If I push it up and I look through this one, say it's very close to that, but it's still lighter than that. Keep pushing it up, and I say it's very close but very dark. In that case, it tells me the value is somewhere in between these two as far as its degree. How light is it? So you see, it's not this light. So that's the sort of mistake sometimes people will make, is they'll just say it's light, it's very light, and they mix a real light color. But let me show you how we go about that. All right, so we identify that. We know it's in the lighter value. and we know I read it as yellow-green. All right, so in this case, I'll reach for my yellow-green. Now, I say yellow-green. I have two options. Really, I have three for raising its value. I can choose this, which is cadmium yellow deep. I can see it's much lighter than that, so that's why I can choose it. Now, it will change the color as well as change the value. I can reach for this, which is my hint of yellow light, but many people have cadmium yellow light or other lemon yellow things. It's a light yellow. I can reach for that. It's lighter, but it's yellow. It's going to help. It's going to raise the value. It's also going to change the color or influence the color because it's yellow. It's going to influence the color towards yellow. This is the way to think this through. And then, of course, white, obvious, but is white the answer? A lot of people will just jump to white to raise the value. And that's the reason also that it doesn't work just to put a value, a line of values, mixed values here, and then mix the color into that, because it doesn't give you the color of that particular value of the thing or the color you're looking at. All right, so let me just illustrate this for you now. Let's go for white. If the white's the obvious one, if that's what we would obviously think, white to raise the value, well, let's just put white in it and see what happens. I'll pull a little bit of this into white. Now, to get that value I'm looking at, oh, it will raise the value. I mean, it will raise the value, by the way. But I want to show you other options. I want to show you how you can get it closer. All right, you see, if I hold this up, now I can see I'm much lighter. I have mixed white into it, but on my palette, it may look the right light. But when I hold my palette knife up and compare, I'm seeing that what I have mixed is much lighter than what I'm really looking for. So I add just a little bit more of the, not much, but you control the value by degrees. And then, if I hold this up, you see, and squint, let me pull this value scale more like this so that you can see. You see, hold this over there and you squint, you see, now I'm pretty much in that value range. I've gone a little bit dark, this little bit dark, so I was in that range, but there's a difference. This is not the same green. Now I'm in pretty much the value range I'm looking at, but it's not the same green as the green I'm looking at. And that tells me what's the difference. This green doesn't have as much yellow in it as this green does. So that means I need to use a yellow to raise that value, not white. Or do I need both? Now see, you have those options. And so let's try this then. Let's pull the yellow over. And let's pull the dark there. And it's not a good idea just to pull dark and plop it right in the middle. But pull it in gradually so that you can control the value. So if I pull this in gradually and mix that yellow, the yellow with that yellow green, you see how different these two are now? But yet they're in that same value range. Now let me see, have I got it in the same value range? Yeah, it's pretty much in the same value range. But it's telling me that it's still not the same yellow. Now, but it's it's much closer. But it's still not the same yellow. So that brings up another question. What is the difference? If this is not the same yellow, it seems to be more intense, brighter, more chromatic, some people would say. So that tells me I need a complement. I need to add a complement to it. I need to make that, I need to pull some of that yellow out. And so to pull some of that yellow out, I might add a complement. And in this case, the yellow I would pull out. I could choose a violet. I could choose anything with a violet in it. And so in this case, what I will do, and I'm just going the long way around here because I need yellow. Yellow is the complement of violet. And I need to pull a little bit of the yellow out. I need to reduce it. And so let's pull some blue into that violet and into that red, and let's create a violet. Now the reason I'm going this way, I could use, as I said, a tube violet. But the reason I'm going this way is to show you, as long as it's violet, it's going to work. So let's pull a little bit of this. Now it's going to change the value. Got to be conscious of that. It's going to change the value. But it's also going to knock down some of that green in that color. And let's see what we have now. You see there? No, I'm pretty much there. Just perhaps it went a little dark. Let's see. Did it? No, that's pretty much it. So by choosing the red and adding the blue to it, I have a lighter value. The red is a lighter value. The blue is a darker value. So I get a not quite as dark as it would be if I were just adding straight purple to it. But you could do either with either thing. I don't want to get too confusing on that. So you see the little process you can take yourself through to get every color you see has what we call an inherent value. That means it has a value that's built into it. And the way you find what that is observation. You simply look at it and identify the color and the value of that color. All right, so let me show you now what we ended up with. The difference of what we initially started out with, the common attitude. If you have a dark yellow green, that was sap green. If you have a dark yellow green and you see a light yellow green, you're going to add white to it and make it lighter. That's the premise. But then this is what happens. And we found out that that is way not it. That's way too cool. It doesn't have enough of the yellow in it. And you see, I want to backtrack just a tiny bit on the question, that it's not just a matter of adding the value. Value scales are just a guide to tell you where you are in terms of how light or how dark. But that's not the only thing that you do, raising that value in order to get the color. And the reason that value, that these adding just a degree of value to it won't give you the right color is that it'll change the color. It doesn't give you just having a gray to it like this. As if I just added that to it, it gives you a different version of the color than you're actually seeing. So you're not just dealing with the value, you are dealing with the value, but you're also dealing with the effects of raising that value. So just with white, that's what we get. But then when we started to realize that we need to add more yellow to it, this is what we got. And that still is not it because it is too intense. It's got too much saturation of that color in it, of the yellow green in it. And then when we desaturated, let me rinse that brush out again so that we can be sure we get this, don't influence that color. Squeeze the brush out really, really good. Then when we desaturated that yellow, we got this. And I didn't get enough paint on the brush. There we go. We got this, which is much closer. It's very, very close to what we have right here. Now, sometimes that we'll see then that it's not just that one color. You'll have the value right, but then you'll see other colors in there. So it could be that in the execution of that painting, we need to be in both these places. Perhaps we need to be a little bit here and a little bit here too in these colors. And you can see here how you get that variation of, then that gets to the temperature of the color, which is the cool version and the warmer version, where it gets a little bit bluer looking, like right in here, and where it gets a little bit more yellow or warmer, or maybe sometimes a little bit more orange looking. Well, anyway, I might have veered off a little bit much towards color there, but I want you to rethink this whole thing about value scales and about what people are doing when they are mixing value scales. They're simply developing for themselves a guide. Now, I know each individual painter has their own method of painting. But I think when you see a painter painting and they're explaining something to you, look at the process. Don't take it as a rule, because not even my processes should be rules for you. But take it as a potential for something that you can explore and see if it works for you. But I think you will find that if you first of all realize every color you see has an inherent value. That means it has a value on its own that's caused by the light. And that value also influences the kind of color you're seeing. So identify the value first, as we did here, then identify what's happening with that color. Usually we can read the color no problem, but identify what's happening with that color. If you call it yellow-green, is it a yellow-green? If you call it a green, is it a green that leans towards blue or a green that leans towards yellow? If it's leaning towards yellow, how saturated is it? Then that we found out here that you could make it overly saturated if you don't tame it down by adding a little bit of its complement to it. So that may sound convoluted, but look, color has this magical quality. It doesn't just change in one way when you make any change in it. It changes in 3 ways. And value is probably one of the most important ways that it changes, because that interprets for you what the light's doing to it. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.